Alina stood before her vanity, brushing the last strands of her glossy brown hair into place, the soft golden light of the bedroom lamp bathing her in warmth. The satin gown she wore clung gently to her growing figure, its pale blue fabric chosen to match the delicate ribbon tied above her waist, just beneath her swelling belly. 5 months pregnant, she felt a glow that no amount of makeup could create, a glow born of expectation and love. She rested her hand on her stomach, feeling the faintest flutter from within, and smiled at the thought of Damien holding their child for the first time. Tonight, she told herself, would be perfect. Tonight, they would celebrate not just his latest hotel success, but the life they were building together. The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of the city below, and Alina took a deep breath, trying to steady her excitement. She had spent the last week rehearsing how she would walk into the gala at Damien's side, how she would smile for the cameras, how she would show him that she could be the wife he could proudly introduce to every investor and guest. Her mind drifted to the day they met, him in a tailored suit, offering her a glass of champagne with that confident smile, telling her she was the most beautiful woman in the room. Back then, she had believed every word, and in truth, she still wanted to. But lately, there had been moments. Moments where he seemed distracted when she spoke, where his phone lit up at odd hours, where he returned home smelling faintly of an unfamiliar perfume. She had pushed those thoughts aside, convincing herself that stress and long hours came with running an empire. Yet, when she asked if he was excited for the baby, his answers were short, almost rehearsed. Tonight, she hoped, would be different. Perhaps being surrounded by friends, colleagues, and the elegance of the evening would remind him of what they once had. She slipped on her heels, smoothing her dress, and picked up the small clutch she had chosen. The mirror reflected a poised woman, serene and glowing, the picture of a perfect wife. But deep inside, under layers of hope and denial, was a quiet unease she couldn't name. She told herself it was nothing, just pregnancy nerves. She had no idea that before the night was over, the illusion she held so tightly would shatter beyond repair. The grand ballroom shimmered with gold and crystal, every chandelier casting a warm glow over guests draped in designer gowns and tailored suits. Soft music drifted from the string quartet in the corner, mingling with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. Alina stepped through the entrance, her hand instinctively resting on her belly, her eyes scanning the crowd for Damien. She imagined him spotting her instantly, smiling, and walking toward her with pride. But the moment her gaze landed on him, her heart faltered. He was already seated at the head table, his arm resting casually along the back of the chair next to him, a chair occupied by a striking woman in a scarlet gown. The dress clung to her curves with deliberate precision, a thigh-high slit revealing long, flawless legs, and her glossy black hair tumbled in perfect waves over one bare shoulder. Vanessa. Alina didn't need an introduction. Something in the way the woman leaned in close, her crimson lips brushing against Damien's ear, made the truth unmistakable. Alina's steps slowed, but she pushed forward, forcing a warm smile as she approached the table. "Damien," she said softly, touching his arm. He glanced at her briefly, the faintest flicker of irritation crossing his face before he leaned back in his chair. "Alina, you're here," he said, as though her arrival were an inconvenience rather than the highlight of his night. Vanessa turned, eyes sweeping over Alina with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, so this is the wife," she said lightly, as though commenting on a distant acquaintance. "Damien's been keeping you all to himself. How sweet." Alina ignored the sting of the remark, and pulled out the empty chair on Damien's other side. But before she could sit, a waiter appeared and quietly informed her that her seat had been moved, to better accommodate the arrangement. He gestured toward a table several spots away, surrounded by people she barely knew. Confused, Alina looked at Damien, expecting him to correct the mistake. Instead, he shrugged. "It's just for tonight. We're discussing important matters here," he said, gesturing to Vanessa as though she were part of some essential business deal. Throughout the evening, Alina caught snippets of their conversation. Vanessa's exaggerated laughter, her hand brushing Damien's arm, her coy glances. Once, Vanessa turned deliberately toward Alina, lowering her voice but loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Some women just don't understand the demands of a man in Damien's position. You have to Keep up, you know. The group around them chuckled, and Damien laughed too, his gaze sliding away from his wife's wounded eyes. Heat flushed Alina's cheeks, not from anger alone but from the unbearable sense of being diminished, of standing in a room full of powerful strangers and realizing her place beside her husband had been given away. She forced herself to smile for the remainder of the night, her hands folded neatly over her stomach, while inside, humiliation gnawed at her like a slow, merciless fire. The moment the speeches ended and the chatter swelled again, Alina made her way toward Damien, her heart pounding with a mix of hurt and determination. She had rehearsed her words in her mind, calm, measured, private. She only wanted an explanation, a moment alone to understand why he had allowed her to be pushed aside. She found him near the champagne bar, laughing with Vanessa and a small circle of investors. The sight of them, shoulder to shoulder, their bodies angled toward one another as though she didn't exist, sent a sharp ache through her chest. "Damien," she said quietly, touching his sleeve, "can we talk? Just for a moment. Alone." He glanced at her, his smile fading into a thin line. "I'm in the middle of something, Alina." "It's important," she insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Vanessa leaned closer, her red lips curving into a smirk. "Don't be too hard on her, Damien. She's probably just feeling sensitive. You know, pregnancy hormones." Her tone dripped with mock sympathy, and the group around them chuckled under their breath. Alina's face burned. "This isn't about hormones. It's about respect," she said, her eyes locked on her husband's. "You've humiliated me tonight, and I deserve to know why you—" "Enough," Damien snapped, his voice suddenly sharp enough to cut through the music. A few heads turned. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Alina's voice trembled, not from fear but from disbelief. "You brought her here, sat her in my place, and laughed at me in front of everyone." Before she could finish, Damien's hand shot out. The slap cracked through the air like the report of a gun. The force spun her head to the side, her cheek instantly throbbing. A collective gasp swept through the onlookers, the clinking of glasses halting midair. Alina stumbled back a step, steadying herself with one hand on a nearby chair. Her other hand flew to her stomach instinctively, the only thought in her mind a silent prayer that the baby was unharmed. Damien straightened his jacket as if nothing had happened. "She's overreacting," he said smoothly to the stunned guests, his tone dismissive. "You know how emotions get during pregnancy. Let's not make a big deal out of it." Vanessa's smirk deepened, her eyes glinting with something that looked like satisfaction. She took a delicate sip of champagne, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Alina's vision blurred, not from tears alone but from the surreal horror of it, that the man she had once trusted with her heart, the father of her child, could strike her so publicly and treat it as if it were nothing. The sting on her cheek was sharp, but it was the deeper wound, the shattering of whatever trust remained, that left her struggling to breathe as the room began to close in around her. In the far corner of the ballroom, partly concealed by one of the tall marble columns, a man observed the unfolding scene with the stillness of someone accustomed to watching without being noticed. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, his silver hair neatly combed back, his sharp eyes missing nothing. While most guests reacted to the slap with shock or awkwardly averted their gaze, he didn't flinch. Instead, his hand slid into his jacket pocket and emerged with a sleek black phone. With steady precision, he lifted it just enough to capture the moment. Alina's head snapping to the side, her hand flying to her stomach, Damien's dismissive expression, and the cruel satisfaction in Vanessa's smirk. He took several photos in quick succession, each one documenting the humiliation with undeniable clarity. Then, as if on instinct, he angled himself slightly, capturing the faces of the surrounding witnesses. Every image was evidence, and evidence was power. His expression never changed, though there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Not pity, but a deeper, heavier recognition. When Damien laughed lightly, brushing off the incident as nothing, the man's jaw tightened. He lowered his phone, slipped it back into his pocket, and took a slow sip of his drink, his mind already moving several steps ahead. He did not approach Alina. Not yet. Timing was everything, and he knew tonight was not the night to make himself known. Instead, he finished his drink, set the glass neatly on a passing waiter's tray, and walked toward the exit. His steps were unhurried, his presence so understated that no one noticed him leave, not even Damien. Outside, the cool night air greeted him. He paused under the soft glow of a street lamp, glancing down at the screen of his phone, scrolling through the photos one by one. Each frame was more damning than the last. So, he hasn't changed, the man murmured to himself, his voice low and gravelly. And she still doesn't know. His name was Gabriel Moretti, a man who once stood among the most powerful business figures in the country before retiring quietly years ago. To the public, his life was a mystery now, a man who had traded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals for seclusion. But Alina's life had brushed against his long before she had met Damien, in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Gabriel's connection to her was buried in a past she barely remembered, a past filled with people who had wanted to protect her from men like Damien. And now, watching her face pale with shock and pain, Gabriel knew his silence could no longer be justified. Tonight, he had seen enough. Soon, Damien Blackwood would learn that not everyone in the shadows was powerless, and that Gabriel Moretti had both the will and the means to dismantle him piece by piece. The door to their penthouse bedroom slammed shut with a hollow echo, and Alina twisted the lock before leaning her back against it. Her legs felt unsteady, the events of the night replaying in jagged fragments, the sting of Damien's hand, the mocking curl of Vanessa's lips, the murmurs of strangers who had witnessed it all. Her cheek still burned, but it was the heaviness in her chest, the crushing mix of humiliation and betrayal, that made it hard to breathe. She crossed the room in slow, uneven steps, sinking onto the edge of the bed. Her hands instinctively found her stomach, feeling for the reassuring movement of the life growing inside her. "It's okay," she whispered to the baby, her voice trembling. "We're okay." But she wasn't sure if she believed it. The muffled sound of Damien's voice came from the hallway, growing sharper as he approached. The handle rattled. "Alina, open the door," he commanded, his tone impatient rather than concerned. She didn't move. "Don't do this," he continued, his voice rising. "You've embarrassed me enough tonight. Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've done to my reputation?" Her eyes narrowed, though tears blurred her vision. "Your reputation," she called back. "You hit your pregnant wife in front of a room full of people, Damien. I think the damage speaks for itself." A sharp laugh escaped him, cold and mocking. "You're being dramatic. Everyone knows you're emotional right now. But you crossed a line. You need to fix this, and that starts with you apologizing to Vanessa." Alina's stomach twisted. "Apologize? To her?" The disbelief in her voice was edged with something new, something sharper than pain. "She's an important connection," Damien snapped. "You insulted her, made her uncomfortable. That's not how my wife should behave." Her fingers dug into the comforter. "And how should your wife behave, Damien? Silent. Invisible. Just there to make you look good." The silence that followed was brief but suffocating. Then his voice dropped, low and dangerous. "Careful, Alina. If you walk out that door, you'll have nothing. No money. No home. And you'll never make it on your own, not with a baby." Those words, meant to intimidate, landed differently this time. 4 years, they might have worked. 4 years, she had swallowed her pride, convinced herself that enduring his temper was the price of security. But tonight, something had cracked wide open. She drew in a shaky breath, lifting her head. She didn't have a plan, not yet, but a quiet ember of defiance flickered in her chest. It was small, fragile, but it was there, and it burned with the promise that one day, she would no longer be trapped behind locked doors of his making. On the other side, Damien cursed under his breath and walked away, certain his control over her remained intact. But for the first time, Alina knew he was wrong. The next morning, Alina sat curled on the corner of the sofa, a blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the crack of Damien's hand and the sea of shocked faces flashed before her. The penthouse felt colder than usual, the silence heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Damien had left early, no doubt to smooth over whatever damage he thought she had done. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made her sit up straighter. "Mrs. Blackwood, my name is Gabriel Moretti. I need to speak with you. It's important, and it concerns both your husband and your family. Meet me at Café Leora, corner of 5th and Main, noon today. Please come alone." She hesitated. The name rang faintly in her mind, but she couldn't place it. Still, something about the message, its directness, its quiet urgency, made her curiosity outweigh her caution. 2 hours later, she stepped into Café Leora, a warm, dimly lit space that smelled of roasted coffee and cinnamon. In the far corner, a man in a charcoal suit sat at a small table, a porcelain cup before him. His silver hair gleamed under the soft light, and his eyes, sharp, assessing, followed her as she approached. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted, rising briefly before motioning for her to sit. "Thank you for coming." Alina took the seat across from him, her hands curling around the edge of the table. "Who are you? And how do you know my name?" "I know far more than your name," Gabriel said, leaning back. "I was once your father-in-law's business partner. I knew Damien when he was still learning how to tie a proper Windsor knot. And I know the kind of man he's become." Her breath caught. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I was there last night," he said simply. "I saw what he did to you. And I know it wasn't the first time he's chosen cruelty over decency." Alina's stomach tightened. "You don't understand. Leaving him isn't so simple." "I do understand," Gabriel replied, his tone softer now. "And that's why I need to tell you something your husband never has. Your parents, they left you an inheritance. A very large one. It's been kept hidden in a trust, and Damien has known about it since before your marriage." Alina stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. "That's impossible. I grew up with nothing." "That was by design," Gabriel said. "Your parents wanted to protect you from being used. Unfortunately, Damien found out. And I believe he married you not for love, but to keep you from ever claiming what is rightfully yours." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Alina absorbed his words. If what he was saying was true, then everything, her marriage, her life with Damien, had been built on a lie. And for the first time, she began to see a way out. Gabriel's eyes stayed locked on hers, the weight of his words still settling over the table. "If you want to be free of him," he said quietly, "you can be. But you can't just walk away. Men like Damien make sure you leave with nothing, and worse, they'll try to destroy you for daring to leave." Alina swallowed, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Gabriel said, leaning in so only she could hear, "that we make him destroy himself, publicly, with evidence no one can ignore. I have resources, contacts, people in law and media who owe me favors. But you're the one who can get close enough to gather the pieces we need." The thought of turning against Damien, of actively planning his downfall, sent a jolt of fear through her. If he finds out, if he even suspects, she glanced down at her belly. "I can't risk him hurting the baby." "You won't be alone in this," Gabriel promised. "I can have someone watching the building, someone ready to step in if he lays a hand on you again. Every meeting we have will be discreet. I've been playing games like this for decades, Alina. I know how to win without making a sound until the very last move." She sat back, torn between instinctive fear and the flicker of something stronger, the need to reclaim her life. "What would you need from me?" "Proof," Gabriel said without hesitation. "Bank statements, business records, anything that shows where the money is going, especially if it's going somewhere it shouldn't. Recordings of him when he's at his worst. People will believe your story if they can hear the venom in his voice. And any witness who's seen how he treats you, staff, employees, even friends, they need to be willing to talk." The idea of turning their private hell into something others could hear and see made her stomach twist, but she knew it was the only way. Over the next week, she began moving carefully, quietly. She slipped into his office when he was in the shower, scrolling through emails and photographing bank records with her phone. She began leaving her own phone recording in her purse during arguments, capturing his insults in his own voice, the cold threats, the mocking laughter. She spoke in whispers to the housekeeper, who had once pressed an ice pack to her cheek, and to the doorman who had seen her flee the building in tears months before. Both promised to speak if called upon. Each time she passed Gabriel a new piece of evidence, his nod was one of approval but also caution. "We're getting closer," he told her, "but patience wins wars." And as the days passed, the fear inside her began to shift into something sharper. 4 years, Damien had controlled the story of her life. Now, for the first time, she was writing the ending herself, and she intended for the world to hear it. Damien was in his element again, pacing the penthouse living room with a glass of whiskey in hand, detailing his vision for the upcoming party. "This will be the biggest launch I've ever hosted," he said, his tone brimming with self-importance. "Every investor, every potential partner, every influential figure in the city will be there. I'll unveil the Blue Horizon project, and they'll be eating out of my hand before the night's over." Alina sat on the sofa, her posture demure, her eyes downcast in the way she knew he liked, the picture of the obedient, supportive wife. "Of course, Damien," she said softly. "You always know how to make an impression." He smirked, clearly pleased, and took another sip. "You'll wear something elegant, understated. No need to pull attention from the main event." "Whatever you think is best," she replied, hiding the flicker of satisfaction behind her calm facade. He didn't realize that while he was busy feeding his ego, she and Gabriel had already put the real plan into motion. The very next morning, she met Gabriel in a quiet corner of the city's botanical gardens. He listened as she described Damien's grand announcement and smiled faintly. "Perfect," he said. "We'll make sure this main event has a far more memorable ending than he's expecting." Over the next week, Gabriel's influence moved like an invisible hand across the city. Discreet invitations were sent to select members of the press, the kind who thrived on scandal. Certain investors with sharp instincts for self-preservation were tipped off that Damien's spotless image might not be so spotless after all. Camera crews were quietly arranged under the guise of covering a prestigious business milestone. Meanwhile, Alina played her role to perfection. She accompanied Damien to fittings, smiled at venue walkthroughs, and nodded obediently when he lectured her on how to behave in front of the guests. At home, she offered him drinks, asked him about his plans, and laughed at his jokes, all while ensuring her recordings, documents, and witness statements were neatly organized and ready for the night they would be revealed. By the time the evening of the party arrived, the trap was set. The venue, a sprawling ballroom in one of Damien's most opulent hotels, glowed under crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of fresh lilies and expensive perfume. Damien, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, made his rounds, shaking hands and basking in the attention. From the corner of the room, Gabriel observed quietly, his expression unreadable. Alina caught his eye briefly as she stood by Damien's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She smiled. The kind of smile Damien thought was for him but which, in truth, was aimed at the man who had given her the tools to reclaim her life. The crowd had no idea that before the night was over, the man they were here to celebrate would be left with nothing but the wreckage of his own arrogance. The ballroom hummed with the low roar of conversation, the sound of crystal glasses clinking under chandeliers that spilled golden light across polished marble floors. Damien was in his glory, striding through the crowd with Vanessa clinging to his arm, her crimson gown a deliberate echo of the last gala. If anyone noticed that his pregnant wife was walking a pace behind them, they either pretended not to or chose not to care. "Tonight," Damien announced to a small cluster of investors, "marks the beginning of my greatest project yet. The Blue Horizon will redefine luxury on the eastern seaboard." Vanessa laughed lightly, running her manicured fingers along his sleeve as if to punctuate his success. Alina, standing just close enough to hear, kept her expression neutral, the perfect image of the quiet, dutiful spouse. Inside, her pulse thrummed like a war drum. As the evening wound toward the main announcement, Damien took Vanessa's hand and led her toward the stage. "Stay close, darling," he told her, loud enough for the front tables to hear. "You're my good luck charm." The insult, subtle but sharp, slid beneath Alina's skin, but she didn't flinch. She knew what was coming. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A massive screen behind the stage flickered to life, displaying Damien's name and the Blue Horizon logo in elegant gold script. He stepped up to the podium, his confidence radiating with every movement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining me on this extraordinary evening." The screen behind him glitched. Once. Twice. Then the logo vanished. In its place appeared a still image, Alina, her cheek turned from the force of a slap, her hand cradling her belly. Gasps rippled through the room like a sudden windstorm. Damien froze, his smile faltering. The image dissolved into a video. The room heard it before they fully saw it. Damien's voice, sharp and venomous. "You'll have nothing if you leave me. Nothing." The footage rolled on, showing his public slap from 2 angles, each one crystal clear, followed by audio clips of his insults and threats collected over months. Whispers rose into outraged murmurs. Then came the documents, bank statements, wire transfers, and a spreadsheet displaying funds siphoned from investor accounts into Damien's personal holdings. Each file slid onto the screen like a damning exhibit in court. Reporters in the back began snapping photos and jotting furious notes, their cameras clicking like gunfire. Damien turned to the projectionist booth, shouting, "Turn it off. Now." His voice cracked under the weight of panic. But the images kept rolling, undeniable and relentless. "Is this true, Damien?" one investor demanded from the front row, his face pale with fury. "This is slander," Damien roared, but even as he spoke, 2 more investors stood and walked toward the exit without another word. Others followed, murmuring to each other in low, tense voices. The air was thick with betrayal. Beside him, Vanessa's grip on his arm loosened. She glanced toward the exit, then at Damien, her lips curling into a small, calculating smile, the kind that said she knew when a ship was sinking. Without ceremony, she stepped down from the stage, her red dress disappearing into the crowd. By the time the final image faded from the screen, Damien was left standing alone under the harsh stage lights, his tuxedo rumpled, his breathing ragged. The room that had moments ago been filled with admiration now pulsed with condemnation. Cameras surrounded the stage, reporters shouting questions that cut through the air like blades. And in the far corner, half hidden in the shadows, Alina watched with steady eyes, her hand resting over her unborn child. She didn't smile, not yet. Victory wasn't about gloating. It was about knowing that, from this moment on, Damien Blackwood's power over her was finished. Forever. The weeks that followed were a slow, steady unraveling of Damien Blackwood's empire. News outlets ran the footage from the party on endless loops, dissecting every frame, every word. Investors withdrew en masse, projects collapsed mid-construction, and lawsuits began piling on his desk faster than his legal team could respond. The man who once strutted through the city like he owned it was now reduced to a figure hounded by reporters and drowning in scandal. For the first time in years, Alina's name was no longer tied to his, and she breathed freely. With Gabriel's guidance and the legal power of her inheritance finally in her control, she relocated to a sprawling countryside estate far from the noise and eyes of the city. The house was surrounded by rolling green fields and bordered by a line of whispering oak trees, their branches swaying gently in the wind. Here, mornings were quiet except for birdsong and the soft rustle of leaves. At night, she could see a sky full of stars, no skyscrapers to block their light. It was in that peaceful home, on a crisp spring morning, that she held her newborn son for the first time. He was small and perfect, with Damien's dark hair but her own soft, steady gaze. As she cradled him, she felt a sense of calm unlike anything she had known before, the kind that came from knowing they were both safe, truly safe. She spent those first weeks wrapped in the rhythm of new motherhood, midnight feedings, gentle lullabies, and long afternoons spent sitting on the porch with her son sleeping against her chest. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She wasn't the broken woman who had stood in that ballroom, humiliated. She was someone stronger now, someone who had taken her life back. One sunny afternoon, she made the drive to a quiet coastal town where Gabriel kept a modest home. He welcomed her in with his usual understated warmth, his sharp eyes softening as they fell on the baby in her arms. "He's beautiful," Gabriel said, his voice low with sincerity. Alina smiled. "I came to thank you. Not just for helping me, but for believing I could do it when I wasn't sure myself." Gabriel shook his head. "You did the hard part, Alina. I just made sure the world saw the truth." As she rose to leave, Alina looked down at her son, then back at Gabriel. "I'm going to raise him to be kind. To never use his strength to hurt someone weaker. To never think that love is control." Gabriel's nod was slow, approving. "Then you've already won." Stepping outside, Alina breathed in the salty sea air, the baby's tiny fingers curled around hers. The past was behind her, the future wide open, and for the first time, she knew she would walk into it without fear.